Good evening, everybody. I was kindly asked from the organizer to speak in English, which is a kind of strange situation for me, you know, to speak English in your hometown, you know, it's kind of wow. Anyway, I will try, but I would like to encourage everybody, my old and new friends, if you have any kind of questions on Serbo-Croatian or as well as Hungarian, because we have some real Hungarians here. I mean, you know, we are not real, but we are a kind of mixture of Hungarians. We understand, you know, Serbo-Croatian as well. It's the same situation in Romania if you go, so you have a lot of Hungarians. They also understand, of course, Romanian. So here's the short story about Ernő Király, the, once more, Hungarian, Yugoslavian, or whatever you want. But Yugoslavia cancelled itself, so I don't know, I mean, you know, it's over. So. Yeah, anyway, he was from, not really from Novi Sad, but I mean, his work was basically done here in Novi Sad. There is some special reason for that. By the way, he was born in Subotica, so probably who came by car. Maybe you guys, you passed nearby. So, as always, all the cities here in Vojvodina, they have at least three names. So, Novi Sad is on Serbian, Újvidék is on Hungarian, and Neusac, it was in German. Subotica is Sabatka in Hungarian, and if I remember well, Theresienstadt? Yeah, that was. And I have to say that Theresienstadt, back to the old days, it was a much more important city than Novi Sad is nowadays. Subotica is kind of shrinking. Novi Sad is growing, but it's in the same time it's also shrinking in the other sense. So, unfortunately, well, this story starts in 1919. And it ends in 2007. That means that Ernő Király was born in 1919, and he died in 2007. Well, I have to say I'm not a musicologist, so you are lucky. So I'm not going to bore to death. I mean, so, but this is very important because why? I mean, you know, in 1919, Subotica, it belonged to Austro-Hungarian Empire. And I know that very well because my grandmother was born in 1905, and I was just counting in how many countries she lived. So she lived in 5 different countries, and she didn't move at all. So there was only borders who moved around her. So as Király died in 2007, so he lived at least in 5 countries, but I think maybe 8, 9, 10, or something like that. It's a very good way to make tourism. You are at home, and you have, you know, in every 2 or 5 or 6 or 7 years, you just wake up in a new country. So that was the case of Ernő Király. Anyway, when he was born, it was the last year of what we called Austro-Hungarian Empire. After the First World War, so everything changed. So Hungary shrinked. It lost something like 80% of the territory that was before. And all these kind of Hungarian national minorities, they found themselves in different countries. That's very interesting and important, I think, not only from political view, but also from artistic view. We are going deeply into that in a minute. So the family background of Király is a rather poor family. His parents were workers, so that means that he didn't really have many chances to have a good musical education. Of course, he had a kind of education, but it wasn't really the academic one. And that was something very important back to those days, because being performed in Yugoslavia, you were supposed to be a member of the, how do you say it, Composers Union, Without that, it was really, really, really difficult to get concert, to be performed on a concert and so on. So I remember quite well, even when he established himself as a composer in a certain level. I mean, I have to say it's really sad, but a lot of people made jokes about him. Especially, he was really a kind of maverick, even visually. I remember when I was a little boy, I shared the same piano stool with his son. So he was always present on the piano lesson. He was a kind of a very bizarre gentleman, you know, something like a very weird mixture. I would say even a kind of, you know, psychedelic mixture of colors like brown, orange, blue, green, you know, so something. He was really, wow, what's going on? And, well, about his musical education. So in the beginning, he tried every kind of, I mean, he was a self-taught composer. Well, in the beginning, he was only a musician. And one of his basic instruments was a guitar, acoustic guitar. After that, he played a little bit of trumpet, accordion, if I remember well, and I can't remember other instruments, but basically it was guitar. It's something very important because actually he was quite involved with composing for string instruments. And the zitraphone, which is his invention, it's also another kind of string plucked. You say plucked? No? Yeah, plucked instrument. Well, here's the story. I read his short biography, or CV, as you wish. It sounds a little bit more modern. Actually, where he lived, there was just a kind of bar, or how do you say it, saloon, or something like that. Of course, for our English friends, I have to explain that, you know, the bar in Yugoslavia was always something quite different than in London or, I don't know, in Paris and so on. So very often it was a kind of tough life with tough guys, you know, much things going on. So anyway, he says that from the very beginning he listened to a lot of folk music. What kind of folk music? Well, that's the question. Because, you know, in this area, not only Vojvodina, but everywhere around us, you have to move something like 20 kilometers and the music changes drastically. So that means that I can imagine that it was a kind of light music, also some, I'm sure, some Hungarian folk music, some Romanian, some Slovak, and so on, and so on, and so on. So all that music have a very distinctive and sharp characteristics, and they are really quite, well, Ligeti once said that it's quite sure that he's composing, I mean, when he was alive, that he composing even when he's in the more difficult avant-garde stuff, that his music has a kind of different sources, because when he was young, he was really drawn into folk music. Well, he was born in Romania, but it was a very, very similar situation, which means Romanian music, Hungarian, and so on, and so on, and so on. So that was exactly the same story with Ernő Király. Okay, before, I'm sorry, maybe I have to be a little bit a kind of musicologist. So, but really briefly and shortly, of course, when we are speaking about folk music, immediately in this kind of geographical area, we are immediately think about who? Bartók. I mean, it's a kind of rule. So what was so specific with Bartók and of course his friend Kodály? They were really involved in the folk music, but a little bit different, in a different way than other composers from the 19th century. So when we are speaking about this kind of East European national revolution, which was really completely politically driven and so on. So we can speak about Smetana, Dvorak, and so on, blah, blah. Even Liszt. And, well, Brahms was German, it's another thing. But all those guys actually, Germans here, they were always the troublemakers, you know. Even there is a kind of, you know, saying we used to say that before we had nothing, after the Germans came and they took us everything. So, you know, I mean, this is always something like that. Back to Bartók. And what was really important with Bartók and Kodály, actually, that they, well, let's listen to some music. So imagine that you are something like the end of the, let's say 19th century, somewhere in Budapest. You have your goulash, it's great, and there is a gypsy band. They are really great musicians and really great way of playing, and they probably, maybe today it's going to be the same, they are probably going to play you some kind of music like that. Well, it's a great playing. I mean, it's really, you know, everything is here, a kind of blues mood and some, with some wine and so on, so it worked. It's great. So the problem was that Bartók... No, I mean, we don't have time. I mean, I could just go on and on and on. So the problem was that Bartók, you know, and Kodály, they said, hey, there must be a kind of problem, actually. So what's the problem? Actually, that they started to analyze. First of all, they had a kind of, we have to say that in Western Europe, what we call a classical music, it's basically, sorry for French people, sorry for English, but it's basically a German tradition. So we can like it or not, but it's a German tradition. So as Hungary was a part of, you know, not a part of, it was, you know, Austro-Hungarian Empire, so the German tradition, even nowadays, it's omnipresent, so in the music as well. So these young guys, they said, okay, we have really a kind of, it's enough of this German tradition, we have to turn something, to search something which is much more in our tradition. Well, now we could start a kind of, you know, blah blah about national, avant-garde, progressive, not so progressive, but we are going to put it away because it was exactly after the Second World War, there was a huge clash between that so-called national school and avant-garde school, which accused national school as a kind of not only retrograde, but also, as Marxists used to say, not subversive. What was that, Chris? The Marxists? No. Reactionary. You know, that's more tough. Anyway, we are going to put it away, but shortly we are coming back to that subject because it's really something which is very, very important, actually. In the after the Second World Yugoslavia, and not only Yugoslavia, also the whole Eastern Europe bloc, which was quite different. They called it Warsaw Pact or something like that. Yeah. Well, we were out of that, so it was great. Anyway, what was the point? Yeah, exactly. So the problem was that those young guys, and that was really something new. I mean, it wasn't new in the sense of Schoenberg. Schoenberg, he was searching for some way out, different. But it was new when we compare, for example, all these national schools from the 19th century with the beginning of 20th century, with especially once more with Bartók. So they said, okay, we are going to look back just to be able to go ahead. So it's something like, you know, the Free Jazz School from the Chicago, they said, ancient to the future, you know. It's a great concept, and it's not so very easy to achieve it, you know, because you have to dig deeper and deeper and deeper just to find a kind of sources. And what was the problem with that kind of music, with that young generation? They said, hey, these melodies are not suited for these kind of harmonies. it's clearly, this is a kind of clash between, because, you know, most of the Hungarian melodies are not in so-called minor or major system, but they are pentatonic, so that means they came from away further. So they said it could be that, you know, these melodies are related to major or minor system. That was the general rule in German and most broadly, actually, with European music. Well, French was a little bit different. They had a chance in 1900. There was a Expo Universelle where the young guy called Debussy, he heard for the first time the gamelan music, which was exactly the same. Gamelan is kind of pentatonic Javanese, you say. And from that point on, Debussy completely changed his way of thinking about music. The problem with Debussy, I adore his music and he's huge. I mean, but I do agree with Boulez. Usually I didn't agree with him. He's also a great composer. But Boulez said that the problem with Debussy was that he used this Far East, it's a kind of imperialistic thing, that he used this Far East influences just like a spice on your food. He never really went deep into that. And I think that Boulez was actually right. So that was exactly what Bartók searched for. So he said, okay, forget this. We are going to try to find our really ancient sources. So the way to do that, they went to the, what's the way? So you have to try to find the sources without the most kind of isolated sources. Well, today it's not possible. Internet is everywhere in the world. But back to those days, the part of which was really preserved, the ancient kind of living, you know, and the playing music and so on, was Transylvania. Now it's the part of Romania, back to those days of Hungary. Transylvania, of course, is well known for Dracula and this kind of stuff. But I can tell you, and we are finally going to, you know, to listen to some music. I mean, and that was also a problem for Bartók, because he said he preferred actually Romanian music to the Hungarian. And many Hungarian nationalists said, well, I mean, this is not good. And, of course, I mean, so what Bartók found, and I have to say that, you know, in music, I'm going to finish with this part, so we are going to listen to some music, and I guess that some of this stuff is going to be a kind of surprise for you. Actually, when we are talking about ethnomusicology, usually we say there is an ethnomusicology before Bartók, and there is an ethnomusicology, even German says that, after Bartók. So that means that he really changed the way of not only to write it down or record all this, they recorded in this cylinder, or how to say it, yeah? So it was amazing because it's a whole process of analyzing it, analyzing geographically, analyzing the background of the costumes, analyzing from the point of the view of the text, the meaning of the text, and so on, and so on, and so on. So that guy collected and analyzed, I mean, you know, a lot of work, more than 30,000 of, not only Hungarian, a lot of Romanian, Slovakian. Even he went to Turkey and even to Algeria. I mean, back to those days, that was France, of course, French colony. Okay, so what they found, it was really something, wow, a completely different world. So people didn't want even to accept that music, that it's a Hungarian or Romanian. They said, no, it's a bullshit. I mean, it's not that, you know. Our music is what you hear in the bar, what you can hear in the bars, and so on. So, okay, let's just go through. We are not going to listen to all the examples. So I really choose something like 2 Hungarian, 2 incredible Romanian, 1 Jewish Transylvanian, sorry, and for the end, I had also choose some 2 very different Serbian. Of course. So the first is actually, if I'm not, I don't have it here. Well, this is a rather new group, but those guys, I mean, there was a kind of movement in the beginning of the 80s. It was also kind of, resistance to the Communist Party and so on. It's called Tanzhaus. That means it's dancing house and so on. So all these young people in the 80s, really skillful musicians, they went to the old guys in Transylvania, basically in Transylvania. They really learned a kind of ancient way of playing. So the group called, I don't know which one is that, but it's not really so important. So we are going to, first of all, we are going to listen. So you remember still the first example we heard. So we are going to hear two completely different examples. First of all, you are going to see it. The first one sounds like a rock music, something like a power chords, You don't have this really, well, of course, there are harmonies are changing and so on, but you don't have really that feeling of kind of minor and so on, major and so on. Okay, let's listen. It's not out of the blue. I mean, it's really connected with the music of Kirai, so that was also kind of, all kind of influences of his music. So here is the first... You can see, I mean, it's not the same. Yeah. Okay, we don't have, unfortunately, we don't have much time. The second thing, which is something very important, not only in the music, now I'm not talking about Bartók, now I'm talking about the East European avant-garde after the Second World War. They just, I don't know if it's going to be clear, probably you heard about polyphony, probably you heard about harmony, and there is something in between that's heterophony. Well, what's that? So, first of all, polyphony, it means you have many voices, they're all equal, so it's a kind of communism in music, so nobody is subordinated. You have a kind of harmony, harmony is a kind of vertical thinking. All the music, rock music, basically jazz music is a kind of, sorry, I wanted to say homophony, so you can distinguish a kind of melody and you can distinguish also a kind of accompaniment. So 95% of rock music or even a lot of classical music is that category. And the heterophony, which is used a lot by Eastern European avant-garde composers, almost you never find it in Western music. Although Kagel has a composition heterophony, but it's not the same meaning of the heterophony. And we are going to listen to it. For example, imagine that you have two violin players, so two saxophone players. Actually, it happened also in free jazz music. They are supposed to play the same melody. For some reason, they are not able to play it exactly in time together. So what happens is that one of the violinists is playing a little bit faster, the second one is playing a little bit slower. So we have this kind of almost a flanging effect, if I may put it that way. So that's something that Kirai also used a lot in his music, actually, in his composed music. So here is another example of Hungarian folk music that uses this kind of heterophony, actually. Okay, so here it is. It's a single. It's not so clear now, but now it's going to be clear. There's always a second one which is not exactly the same as the other one, so that's exactly that. Speaking of jazz music, I have the same example, it's a much more radical one, but this is Ornette Coleman. We are speaking about 60s. With his quartet, one known with Don Cherry, Charlie Hayden, and I think Charles Moffett or something. So listen to this. It's exactly the same way of structuring music. So. So those guys are playing together, but it's not the point actually. So they are kind of, you know, and so on. Okay, it's a short example. Yeah. So we are going much further. Now we are in Romania. So in the far remote mountains in Romania, and this is whenever I played it to people, everybody said, "Wow, what did they smoke?" No, it's not that. No, sorry. Listen to this. Unfortunately, we don't have more time. Okay, we stay still in Romania. So in Romania, we have this kind of, just as here in Serbia, we have this kind of phenomena called brass band. It has nothing to do with the New Orleans brass band. It's an old tradition which comes from, actually, that was the Turkish invaders who used to play on the streets, just like in New Orleans, just here, And this is a kind of music which is very popular, especially with the movies of Kusturica, of course. But it was also omnipresent back to those days. If somebody told me that the whole world is going to listen one day to that music in something like in 70s, I would say you're completely sick, But it's exactly what's happened. So there is a well-known brass band, the Gypsy Brass Band. Those guys are really great. I even worked with them. It's Fanfare Ciocărlia. And I would say it's a kind of Romanian speed metal. I mean, this is so. Listen now. It's the same. The heterophony is everywhere. They try to play as fast as possible. So you have this kind of... Oh, it's amazing. I remember I was in 92, you mentioned yesterday Fave, in Slovenia. So we played with somebody there, so we went to Fave, and I was expecting something like, Laibach Kunst or things like that, and it was a kind of Balkan nights in Fave, it was something like, what's going on? It was really amazing. Okay, so we are, this is quite interesting, so Transylvanian, just a short Jewish kind of blues. It's not blues, of course, but I try to translate it. Yeah. So here is the end of the circle. After that, improvisation is going on. So back to Serbia. South Serbia also a lot of gypsy musicians, and not of course only gypsy music. Well, that's the damage made by Kusturica. You know. I had friends in somewhere in Europe, so they had concerts here in Serbia. So I asked them, how was it? So they said, oh, well, it was great public, great food, you know, whatever you want, nightlife, of course. And they said, well, we were kind of surprised, you know, so many white people. You know, so I said, what do you mean? I mean, what do you know, in the Kusturica movies, we see, they said black people. It's not really black people, but gypsies, you know. So they have a kind of, you know, they have kind of image that, you know, here it's only gypsies, which is, of course, it's not true at all. No offense to gypsies, it's not about that, but I mean, you know, it's a kind of, you know, just trying to give a kind of very different image of in fact, only one dimension of certain cultures. Okay, here is the Serbian way of kolo. Everybody knows that. Same with violin and string players. Very interesting. And so on. Well, the second example is really amazing one. So it's a singing, the old, Bartok used to say it's an old level, so really the most archaic way of singing. And now we are, same from Serbia, and now we are almost talking about contemporary music, because it's not tonal at all. They use quarter tones, which micro tunings, in fact. I don't know how they achieve that exactly, because one can see that they really sing in a very, very precise way, actually. And I played that stuff to many contemporary composers. They were kind of, my God. And what is really amazing for me that maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. So, but I didn't really hear this kind of replica in the music of contemporary Serbian composers, which I really find a kind of real, how to say it? It's a pity, because it's really a great tradition. I have to say that this is exactly the same of the diesel culture, somebody say, or something like that, or turbo folk. And usually people who are listening to this diesel culture and so on, which is completely based on Turkish music, actually. Those people, of course, and many other people, even educated people, truly hate this kind of music. So we are going to, for me, it's absolutely amazing. So. It's really microtonal music. Huh? For example, if I'm now playing Penderecki from 60s, the Threnody for the Hiroshima, I mean, for me it's just, it works perfectly, you know, I mean, listen to this, it's exactly the same problem. I mean, it's So, sorry. We don't have much time. We didn't even listen to Kirai. Sorry for that. Okay. All that music I played you, so that's something that Kirai was really influenced by. So you see, I mean, if you are here, you know, you don't have really all the time to go to New York, Paris, and they are great cities and so on. So he was the guy one of the guys who tried actually to transpose all these experiences, and he was also an ethnomusicologist, which means he said that he has a better situation, of course, because he had all this literature actually on his disposal by Bartók. So, but he went to all these villages. He was listening to that because he said that he was really interested about how musicians, I mean folk musicians, they communicate with each other. So that's something which is essential. I think that we were speaking about all this, I mean, you know, improvisation. They also improvise. Of course, during 1,000 years, or I don't know how many hundreds of years, this improvisation became a kind of, you know, you learn it. Of course, everybody is adding something or putting out and so on. But still, it's a way of real playing. And for example, I was talking to some of Romanian folk musicians. They used to play weddings during 4 days. So, and they say that when they play, they of course of dancers. They know exactly every note, every switch of the piece. And they said, if you don't play it well, the guy put his knife and he said, that was the last time, you know, you made it. So you see, it's a kind of, you know, I mean, you know, watch it out. Okay, what was one of the first really interesting pieces of Kirai, I mentioned you that he was a guitar player. So he got interested in a very special instrument. Everybody, I mean, who is from here, heard about tambura, tamburica, you know, this is a national, I mean, this is a kind of, you have different sizes of tambura. And actually, it has a slight connection with tampura, you know, which comes from India or from Persia and so on. Nobody knows exactly how it. Again, it was Turks who brought it to Bosnia. We have here in Vojvodina, Croatia, and so on. Here, as Kirai worked at the radio station in Novi Sad had an tremendous impact on his work. Why? Because he was working there as a musicologist. He had the possibility to make experiments in the studio, which was back to those days. It was, I mean, DIY culture didn't exist in the 50s and 60s, so he was allowed to make kind of experiments with all this, you know, playing back and so on, and slowing down and so on and so on. That was the second thing. The third thing, that most of his, not most, but a lot of his compositions were recorded, broadcasted. So it was a kind of base, I mean, it was basically the base of the cultural life in Yugoslavia. Not only this radio station, but every republic had its radio stations, you know, radio dramas, and so on, and so on, and so on. He was also working for radio dramas, I mean, German says Hörspiel or something like that, which was quite developed. I don't know what's going on at the moment here. But there was also the orchestra. So you had the orchestra who was paid by the radio station. So those guys, just like a Motown production, you know, the guys are coming in, you know, they play their stuff. After that, you know, they go home and so on. And for him, that was a really good kind of possibility to try to experiment with this kind of tamburica, which is, once more, it's between, you have the big one, the biggest one is a kind of double bass, but with frets. After that, the guitar is something like a Spanish guitar, a little bit different size. It has a... Cara, je li ima, šta imaju duple žice, kako se tamburice? Ne znaš, ja? Nema duple, ja? Ali ovi ostali imaju duple. Well, it has double strings, you know, and so I'm not a specialist in tamburica, but my old friend... Ima, ja? Ima jednu duplu žicu. Okay. Some of, I mean, different kind of instruments, so different size and different way of tunings as well, you know, something like that. It is a very special character, but usually we are used to kind of tambura music here. It's very mild, very nice, very almost like the first example from the beginning. So in 1961, I think he made this piece, and he was experimenting with all kind of way of playing, this instrument. So we can maybe a little bit listen to the it's from '69. Actually, it's called Bacchanale. Okay, and so on. So, unfortunately, we can't go on. Okay. So, one can maybe wonder, it sounds something like really improvised music. And in a way, it is. So, it's a kind of technique. It's not invented by Kirai, but many, composers, contemporary composers. But the way the improvising was treated in Eastern European scores, it was a kind of different than, because as Chris noted yesterday, it's quite true. West was really into mathematics, Xenakis was a really great mathematician. Boulez was much into mathematics. Stockhausen in a certain period. After that, he was kind of fed up with mathematics and started to improvise and so on and so on. But here, just really because of this experience of folk music and the way the folk musicians are playing and improvising, I think that actually a lot of, and not only here, also in Poland, composers like Lutosławski or Penderecki, we just heard Penderecki, were really much more into the sound, not into the construction. It was also the same with American composers. That's really very bizarre. For example, when West European composers, they were really into construction. John Cage said that I'm not interested about how it is made. I'm interested how does it sound. So it was a kind of very similar in East Europe. So they was highly criticized by Western colleagues. They said, "Wow, it's not very, not very scientific, not very profound. It's a kind of way of improvisation was also always regarded by the academia as kind of something dangerous, something to be aware of. We never know what's going on, we can't control it, so it's something not welcome. Okay, I'm going to show you, even if you are not at all a musician, you're going to have a kind of understanding what's going on the piece. Just a short part of the piece we are going to listen now. I have it's a kind of graphic score. So I hope it's going to work. Just a second. It's not the best sample, but you can see, no? Yeah? Okay. So I have only few, you see, violins, it's violins in Italian. Okay, pizzicato, it's a way of playing violin and so on. You have a CB, it's a contrabass or a double bass, You have trombone or voice. You can see that the trombone or voice, in this example, I have a voice, SZ on Hungarian is S, So he is not, if you just take a slight look at it, you don't see you don't see notes, actually. These are you have a kind of rhythm, and you have a kind of, basically the line in the middle line, it's a kind of the middle of the instrument. So that means everything which is above, it means it's higher and so on. So okay, let's just listen. It's only 1 minute or something like that, and you can. Here we are. You can really visually see what's going on. Okay, I think it's. Hold on, I'm coming. No. I think it's that. Yeah. Okay, listen. You see, we are here. Now we have basses. You see? It's very visual. Here we are. Now it's the voice continues here. Now you have a duration. He says a certain action, you have to do it during 10 seconds. But you are quite free to do that. It's kind of, you see the U. These are overtones or violin. Very random. You can choose whatever you want. Here is improvisando, which means improvise. Okay. And now it's a special sign playing between the tailpiece and the bridge. So it's only, he gives only rhythmic kind of structure, but still you are kind of free to continue in your way. Okay, and it's almost, yeah, really? Anyway. Yeah, we can go on a little bit. Well, I try to, yeah, that's always the problem with this kind of things. Okay, and now, well, I have to kind of finish this because there are a lot of musicians here waiting for playing, and I can understand them. Anyway, the crucial, invention was his instrument called Citraphone. Citra is a Hungarian. It's not only Hungarian. It's a lot played in Hungary. Even there is a movie score for The Third Man. Yeah, that's it. It's also played on Citra. So it's all over again in this kind of region, but it's very, it's a kind of really, I would say, well, kind of omnipresent in Hungary. So the idea was that Citra has a lot of strings, and you can just play it. Of course, you can play it like a steel guitar or something like that. It's not the same, but so to speak, a kind of steel guitar. Well, the idea about Citrophone was, okay, I'm going to show you what Citra is. It's here. I have many photos here. For example, this is one Citra, this is another one, this is the third one, this is the fourth one, and so on. So I made those photos back to 97 or something like that. And actually it was intended to the CD that Chris published. It was something, 98 or something like that. Yeah. It's a great CD. I don't know how do you sell them. You have still, no? Okay, tiny bit. But I saw on the internet there is a lot of very positive reactions, so that's really good. And after that, just after that, we published this kind of book, which is in 3 languages. You don't have all the text in 3 languages, but you have many of them. You have scores and so on and so on. Don't try to get it because you can't. So I mean, it was published something like for friends or something like that. It's really maybe it's a job for you, so you can reprint it or something like that. Could be interesting. Okay, what is interesting with Citra? So he took basically 4 Citrophone. They are amplified, and you can even see that the amplification is rather kind of, pickups from guitar. It's a really little bit old-fashioned, if I may put it that way. These are old guitar pickups and so on. And they tune them in a quarter tone system. So, and he also transformed them that you can play them. Usually you don't play with the bow, but you can play it with the bow. You can mix all these sounds together. I mean, all these citras, because they're connected with a kind of mix. Yeah, you see it. It's also really old-fashioned. I mean, it looks great, at least for me. Yeah, it's different kind of angles. Okay, we are going to, this is Kodai. Yeah, okay. Here, this kind of potential, how do you say potential? Okay, anyway. This is an old kind of, it doesn't exist anymore. It's a DIN kind of connection. We use it for stereo, connecting. It's really kind of, wow, what's going on? And actually that was the reaction. Everybody says, well, it's a nonsense, so what you are doing. Okay, so I'm going to play you a few, and we are going to finish the session. I'm going to play you a few examples of this Citrophone playing. Very often he made a kind of mixture of live playing with pre-recorded tapes and old kind of, what he had at the time, a kind of distorting sound or using kind of effects and so on. Okay, let's listen to the... hold on, just a moment. Yeah, this is really a great piece. You can find it on the CD that was published by Recommended Records. It's called Perpetuum, like Perpetuum mobile. Well, here is another example from the piece called Folk Rustle. It's only same Citrophone. And for the end, one of his probably best pieces written for Citrophone tape and female voice, actually his wife, Lodi Katalin. Now she lives in Budapest, and recently she got this huge prize. It's a John Lennon prize from Yoko Ono. Yeah. She was and she is, I think so, that she's still active, an extraordinary poet, and especially kind of, how do you say it? I mean, it wasn't really a real singing, but kind of sound poetry, exactly.
That was her voice.
No. Now she's coming now. No. The another one, no. The other one, it was a kind of classical. She was never doing. I mean, Lodi Kaplan, she was never really singing. Yeah, that's true. I mean, the treatment is really there. So here is the piece called Reflection number 7, and I don't think so. We are going to listen to all. It's not so long. It's until 7 minutes. So once more, so voice, Citrophone, and tape, 74. Okay, so I'm afraid we have to finish here. So thank you very much. Thank you.